What up, fermenters? I wanted to jump on real quick and give everybody a podcast high five because this is episode 100. We've been at this for almost 2 years, and we've hit a really important milestone, and we've been able to do that because you all have been listening, and I just wanted to say thank you. I also wanted to say that for me, it's been such an unexpected joy to get to work on this project. Like, I knew at the beginning that this was going to be fun, but I had no idea that it would add so much to my own life. You know, there's just something about getting to hear people's stories, getting to hear their perspectives, their struggles and their victories. Something about all of that adds soul to our own lives. And one of the things that I've learned in the past couple of years is that human beings are almost infinitely interesting. Everyone has a gift to offer if only someone were to ask the right question. I'm still working on learning to ask the right questions. So thanks for listening. I hope you'll keep checking in with us every single week. I hope you'll share this with your friends and family, and I hope it'll continue to be something that gives you life. Thanks, y'all. Peace.
Fermentation. It's kind of that intersection of art and science because you don't know what your end result is going to be when you start. You can only start with the best possible fruit, and you can make a lot of bad wine from good fruit. And the only way you can make a really, really great wine is start with great fruit. We kind of make the joke that fermentation is kind of the voodoo, because when something takes one thing and transforms it into another, and you don't know exactly how that happens. I mean, you do on science, just like a sunrise, man. You watch the sun come up, and I can tell you scientifically why it happens. But there's a beauty to it that is hard to quantify. But you have to be there, and you have to put the work in first to get to the fermentation. It's just like, you know, being in the right place at the right time, watching the sun come up just to take the right photo. A lot of prep goes into it for that one little moment.
The Ferment.
You're listening to the Ferment Podcast, conversations about worship and transformation. Welcome to episode number 100. Today we're taking a step back and looking at fermentation as a metaphor for spiritual change. Today's guests are pastor and spiritual director Jared Boyd, licensed professional counselor Dr. Elizabeth Pierre, and entrepreneur and winemaker Keith Saarloos.
Peace. All right, what's up, Jared? How are you doing?
I'm doing really well.
Hey,
It's good to see you,
thanks
Adam.
for coming on to episode 100.
It's so exciting, dude. Good work.
Oh, I know, man. This is great. Well, the idea that we have here in episode 100 is we want to talk about transformation and why people change, or maybe how people change. And I'm talking to a bunch of different people, and I guess I just want to start there. Why do people change, Jared?
Oh my gosh. I know it's such a big question. I think people change for different reasons. I think one of the questions that I've been sitting with is we have to start with, what are we trying to change into, or what are we trying to get other people to change into? So I think I was reading in the Sayings of the Desert Fathers, I think his Abba Anthony says something like, whoever is hammering a lump of iron must first decide what he wants to make, whether he wants to make a sword or a plow or something like that. Otherwise, the work is going to be in vain. So I think before we begin to answer how do people change, I think we need to sort of talk a little bit about what are they supposed to change into.
That's right.
So,
well, I guess being as this is the Ferment Podcast, and I guess being as we are Christians,
yeah,
the thing that sits under the thing, I hope, is how are people changed into the image of Jesus? As Paul would say, I think this is in Romans 8, that God has predestined us to be conformed to the image of his Son.
That's right. Yeah. I think that's really good. I think that even amongst the the people who follow Jesus, I think we get different ideas about what it is that we're supposed to do. So I think, here's how I think about this. Jesus is the perfect representation of the Father. We are being changed into his likeness, and he's coming as a representative of the outpouring grace and love of the Father. So the thing that we're meant to become are people who love like God loves. And so if the thing we're trying to be transformed into or being transformed into is love of other people, it seems to me that the way people change is we get opportunity to love, and then we learn how to love. And I think the real nitty-gritty sort of discipleship question that I think you're probably trying to get at right here is that the thing that prevents me from love is probably really different than the thing that prevents you from being able to love. And so part of the way I think about this is that we've got to get present to what is it that prevents me specifically from being able to love the person in front of me or across the room or across the street or the person I don't really at the present moment have the capacity to love.
Well, I'm wondering, how do you wake up to that kind of thing?
Like what's preventing me?
Yeah, that's very specific, and I really love how you framed it there. You know, what's preventing me from love? Because I really love your formulation of if we're trying to love, if we're trying to live into the image of God, the God who is love, then part of my discipleship is waking up to maybe what is preventing me from maybe loving my neighbor or the person who's in front of me, or maybe even myself.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Because we're instructed to love our neighbor as we love ourselves. And so this is where it just becomes like a whole room of things. I think the way that I'm learning how to talk about this is the way that the church has talked about this a lot, about the passions and the way that the passions sort of get in the way of the passions being sort of our default patterns are our sin, right? Our brokenness gets in the way of our capacity to love other people. And
so when you're using the word passion there, you don't mean like the passion of Jesus, the passion that I'm living life with. You're using it in a very specific way. I'm kind of hearing it in a different way there.
Yeah. I'm using it in a way of like, if you think about it as our sort of more broken emotions, like, or our more broken patterns of behavior. So for example, if you're quick to anger, right, we clearly recognize that that's coming from somewhere. Where is it coming from? And like, what's specific to your story about why you might be quick to anger, or you might be quick to despair or slothfulness, or whatever it is that prevents you from sort of receiving the love of God into you such that it fills you up to the brim in a way that you spill out onto other people. Let's figure out what's preventing that process from happening, because that's how I understand how we change, is that we get really filled up with the love and the Spirit of God, and it changes us from the inside out.
Yes.
What prevents that process? And some of that, it's like we can go back to family of origin stuff. We can go back to just patterns that we've taken on to cope in the world. And so when I say pattern or passions, that's sort of what I'm referring to is the stuff that's at work that we're not quite aware of.
And part of what I'm hearing in just what you're sharing right now, Jared, is also just the need to actually become a fairly self-aware person. This feels like part of this discipleship work is knowing yourself a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. Which takes time and it takes practice. And so, I talk a lot about rule of life and way of life and structuring our life in a way that aids this process. And so often, I get in these conversations where people are like, I need to form a rule of life. I need to create more structure in my life. And oftentimes they assume that that's the thing that's going to change them. But that's not what changes us, as far as I can see. It's that creates space so that we can be before God and we can receive sort of invitation and respond to that invitation from God. A rule of life doesn't change us. It's what happens once we have those practices in place that create that space in our life with God.
I think that's a really important discipleship distinction. Yeah, because as I've been pastor for several years, one of the things that I've bumped into with people on more than one occasion is the idea that like, oh, prayer will change me, or fasting will change me, or, any sort of like discipleship, discipline, or practice. But really all those things do is exactly what you're saying, right? They hold space. It's the Spirit who changes us. It's God who changes us. It's
That's right.
God at work in my life. And all of these things, what they're really doing is holding a little space so that God can be active, or so that I can participate with his activity in my life.
Yeah. So I think this concept of practices and rule of life, where people begin to take on this posture of, oh, this thing is going to change me. It's actually, I think the way I experience it is it changes me because it gives me an opportunity to surrender. And that act of surrender is sort of pumping opportunity for humility before the Lord into my blood, so to speak. And it's in that posture that we can receive the Lord saying something like, hey, can we like talk about this thing in you that is preventing you from being able to love? Because I'd like to pull it out, but we have to consent. God's a gentleman in that way. Like we have to consent to the work that the Lord wants to do in our life. And so I think some of the practices of silence and solitude and, prayer, they just give us opportunity to consent to that process and surrender to the work of the Lord in our life.
Yeah, I love that. I have one more question for you. And you've been, in some ways, already answering this. And so maybe this is just a chance to reframe for you. And in case people haven't already picked up on it, you lead a modern monastic urban community in Columbus.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's very interesting. I love what you're building. But I guess I'm wondering, from that perspective, what are some of the ways like a contemplative approach can lead to meaningful change, or make space, like you were talking a moment ago, can make space for meaningful change?
Yeah, I think a contemplative approach is just an approach where we are becoming more present to ourself and more present to ourself in front of God. And one of the things that I'm trying to sort of lay out is in all of my life and the work I'm doing with our church and the work I'm doing with the order is this idea that there are really two parts of our life with God. There's our life with self and our life with God. And we have to get really honest about who we really are before God and what's actually really happening. And so what the contemplative approach does is it helps to sort of remove some of the layers that we cover ourselves with and allow us to stand a little bit more naked before God. And now we can actually have a relationship with the Lord in an intimate, connected way, because we're allowing God to interact with who we really are and not some sort of shadow version of ourselves or some sort of covered up version. So sitting before God for a long time and asking him to communicate, God, what do you see in me? I think people will be really surprised by what they hear.
Okay, so can we just slow down here and maybe just end with this? Because it feels like you're suggesting a practice here. And maybe this is something that people could maybe they could try it today or in the next week. What do you mean by sitting with God?
So just find a quiet spot, find a comfortable spot, sit down, open your hands, rest them on your lap. Say, come, Holy Spirit. And just ask God, is there anything that you would want to talk to me about? Is there anything that you would want to say to me? And just wait. And you might not hear anything. It might take weeks of just doing that and just showing up in conversation in and sitting before the Lord begins to sort of whisper. But if you ask God to speak directly to your heart and say, God, would you just say something that you see about me? More often than not, my experience is the thing he says is kind and generous and loving. And every once in a while, he gives that fatherly word that says, hey, we need to talk about this thing that we haven't really dealt with.
Yeah.
But I think 90% of what the Lord is wanting to communicate to us is, you're doing great. I love you so much. And I'm so for you. I'm so glad you're here with me. Thanks for showing up here. That's the thing I think people will be surprised by. I think people sometimes hesitate to sort of create this intimate life with God because they picture God as this harsh voice in their life. And I just think that's religion. That's put that into people, not an actual encounter with the living God who is love.
Yeah. It's really interesting that the person who knows us best loves us most.
That's so true. And when you get it,
it's
when you get that
devastating.
experience, it totally changes your life.
Yeah, it's totally devastating. My spiritual father, Ray Hollenbach, he said that to me once, and it was devastating. It was so, heart-opening that the God of the universe, who knows me the most, who knows everything about me, like good, bad, ugly, in between, all my weakest moments, all the times I've lied, all the times I've, just not been my true self, to put it that way.
Yeah.
He's also the one who loves me the most. And that's kind of what I hear in what you're saying, even like in this practice of sitting before God and asking him, what do you see?
Yeah.
Anything you would like to say to me?
Yeah. And what that does is it grows us in our capacity to love God, because we know from scripture that we love because he first loved us. And I think a lot of people are trying to love God more without getting the first part, which is that, God really loves me, and my love for him and my obedience out of love is a response to receiving the love of God in so many ways.
Yeah. Just to take this back to what we were talking about at the very, very beginning. If we ever get that, right? If we ever get that the one who knows us best is the one who loves us most, eventually that works down into our heart, and hopefully it helps us to love weak people more as well.
Absolutely. Like we learn to love others by watching God love us. So that's what it means to be a disciple of Jesus, who is God, is that we just watch how God loves us in gentle ways, how God reassures us, how God is present to us. And it's like God is teaching us how to love other people through his instruction of loving us, So it's like we have an opportunity to go to school with God every single morning as we sit before him and just say, teach me how to love. And the way he responds to that is, I'll teach you how to love. Watch how I love you. Which is why I think, Jesus is always like, go and do likewise.
Yeah. Love that. That's beautiful.
Yeah.
We get an opportunity to go to school with Jesus every day.
That's right.
Amen. Amen.
Yeah.
Thanks, Jared.
Yeah, my pleasure, man. It's so good to be here. You're doing great work.
Hi everybody, this is Naomi Latta with the Vineyard School of Worship, and I would like to personally invite you to Thrive, an all-ages worship leader training happening online this October. Each session is designed to equip worship leaders serving their local church and is soaked in kingdom values and practice, brought to you by instructors from all around the world. We invite you to join us and challenge you to grow with us as we learn how we as worship leaders can become non-anxious presences both on and off the stage. Thrive consists of 6 sessions in October, all 2 hours each. You can attend live and participate in live discussions, or you can choose to audit the course and learn at your own pace. We also offer add-ons if you are interested in songwriting coaching, spiritual direction, and more. Visit VSOW www.fermentw.org to register and use the code FERMENT15 for 15% off your registration. This training is all ages, so invite yourself, invite your friends, invite your youth group worship team, and we can't wait to see you in October.
In my experience as a therapist, one of the reasons why folks change is because the pain or their stuckness becomes unbearable. What has worked prior no longer works. It's like, okay, whether it's someone who's trying to, even something like start dating, but nothing is happening. And they're wondering, why is this not working? Or why do all my relationships, whether romantic or not, end so horribly? Like there's a pattern. And I thought by talking about it or by doing this or that, it would get better. So the pain is it's starting to become unbearable. Like, okay, something is forcing them. Like it's like an infection. At first, you're like, you kind of ignore it. And then suddenly it gets bigger and bigger and bigger where you can't ignore it anymore. It needs to get treated. You try to do it yourself. Some people will prick at it, but sometimes that's not enough. So the pain is unbearable, or there's a sense of stagnation in their lives in some way, internally, sometimes spiritually, relationally, where they're like, I need someone else to kind of help me see what's going on. Maybe I'm not seeing something that perhaps they can give me some guidance in how this might change for me.
Yeah, Dr. Elizabeth, part of what I'm hearing and what you're saying is pain is a radical motivator for change.
Yeah.
And then maybe deeply connected to pain, also the idea of repetitive negative patterns.
Yes. Yeah. Like I keep, no matter what, same, different person, same energy.
Yes.
Keeps coming up in different ways. What's going on that I keep results, even that I'm trying to work out in a different way.
Yeah. So maybe for people who are listening, if there's recurrent pain or recurrent negative patterns, maybe this is an invitation to change.
Exactly.
Yes.
Exactly. And as you know, we've talked before that a lot around my research is around interpersonal violence. And so when women and men find themselves either in unhealthy relationships, like where they're repeatedly abused, either emotionally, physically, or sexually, they're like, but this woman seems so different. They're like, why am I attracting these people over and over again? Why am I attracting these toxic relationships? And I want to be very clear. I'm not saying that anyone deserves this or condones this, but research does show that when we are not conscious of our own issues, especially around our earlier trauma, we do end up reenacting and become and being re-victimized again. So that's why people come to therapy, especially for me. It's like, what's going on? Why am I attracting the same people?
That's right.
And so I help them get in touch with like, well, it sounds like you're still trying to work through your past abuse issues.
Well, I guess that brings me to another question, and you've probably already started to answer it. Can you talk to us about why people come to therapy?
Right. It's connected to the first question. It's like, okay, like I've tried everything. I've tried talking to my pastor. I've done this, and not that pastors aren't wonderful, but there's the way that the language and the deep emotional work that therapists can mirror to clients in a way that pastors are not able to. Not that they can't, they have their role. I think that definitely pastors have. I was a pastor. You have your role to minister spiritually. But there are things that we studied to understand about someone's psyche, and I'm more psychoanalytic, Adam, where I really look at the unconscious and how our past relationships affect our current relationships. And it's called object relations therapy and self-psychology. So I, as a therapist and within my own practice, will look at like, okay, how are you reenacting your past relationships and your current relationships? Usually it's a relational problem that people come in, whether it's marriage, children, work, relationship to self. All of those are reasons why people are like, I need someone to kind of mirror to me what's going on, and language, and to do that emotional depth work. And that's really scary. It's like a deep well. I feel like our souls are such deep wells, and our psyche are such deep wells that the therapist helps and enables and also the client to put language to it, not just spiritual language, which is important, but like, hey, here's some real cognitive issues, neurological issues, and psychological issues that's contributing to why you're in pain or feeling stuck.
Well, and one of the things that sort of occurs to me while you're talking here is, it's important to be a part of a faith community. It's important to have a pastor. But sometimes we do need somebody who's outside of our loop, don't we?
Absolutely. Someone who's fresh, who can see.
Yeah.
Because in some ways, again, pastors, I served as a ministry. You're a pastor. Praise God, it's all wonderful. But sometimes that can be really safe. There's a way that you cannot really, it's very familiar. But when you have someone who really, basically, as a therapist, there's really nothing in it for me except for you to do well. Sure, I get payment, but there's no hidden agenda other than your own wellness.
Yeah.
I don't have any like, I want you to do this to get this. It's your time, your space. And for some people, Adam, having that space, I've talked to people like, it feels so selfish for me to work on myself. And I'm like, that's an interesting language for you to use, that by taking care of yourself, you're feeling selfish. Whereas we don't talk about that in any other way, like taking care of your car, taking care of your physical health. But when it comes to our emotional health and mental health, we think it's selfish. I think that says a lot about what we believe about ourselves and our psyche.
Yeah, it does.
That doesn't matter.
Yeah, I was just thinking about my own journey, but then also the people that come to my church that I not just love, but I like them, and sometimes we're friends, and you begin to know someone in a particular way, and even if they're coming to my office for, a traumatic experience or a problem in their life, sometimes our own friendship or our past connection at the church, sometimes I'll just be honest here, it keeps me from seeing what's going on. And so I think therapy can be a profound healing space or even transformation space, because like you say, there's no connection. There's nothing in it for you as the therapist. There's not even the previous history of knowing this person or how they present or the way that they connect to my family or to the church family. It's just that person's moment.
Right. And it's about, 45 to 60 minutes where you get to engage what's going on internally.
Yeah.
And for you to reflect on your life and on your relationships. And for some people, that's actually frankly scary. Like because maybe there are not often many spaces for that. And that's a big thing for me and for most therapists, to offer a non-judgmental space, no matter what the history is. And I've heard quite a bit about different things like, well, that's your story. And how do we journey together in this?
Yeah, I love what you just said there, non-judgmental space. I wish church was more of a non-judgmental space. And I'm saying that as a pastor, right?
Right.
But there is something so freeing about having a place or a person where the judgment's just sort of disconnected. And you can hopefully over time really begin to show up as who you really, really are in that moment, no matter how painful or disappointing that is. Because that's where the healing can start.
Yes. And the big thing in therapy and clinical work, the presenting problem, there's something called a presenting problem, is never really the problem when the client comes in. It's usually they'll say, for example, I'm having an issue with a parent or my kid. It's not necessarily they're lying, but what they're doing is testing. Like, can I trust you with what I'm about to really going to share?
Yeah.
And then once they feel safe, and people can feel, I think also change, and it's something I'm still figuring out, Adam, embodiment is so critical. I think one of the things that made Jesus so amazing, that his body, there's a thing about Jesus that made people come to him, people who are wanting to come to him. And therapists create as not just a therapeutic space, but a physical space that says you're invited to share here. And when that client feels right, and they can feel it, you know it. You've been in situations like, I can't tell this person anything because they're not ready for it. They didn't say anything, but your body is responding to it. And so for clients, and once they feel that, then they start saying, well, this is what actually happened. So it's not that the other stuff wasn't important. They wanted to know, would my story be safe in your hands? Will it be held well?
Well, just one thing that comes to mind while you were talking about the uniqueness of Jesus there for a second and how people were attracted to him. I've loved this for a moment. Jesus is God's son, part of the Trinity. Jesus is holy. Right? He's spotless. He's the blameless lamb. But there's something about Jesus that's attractive to sinners. There's something about Jesus that's deeply attractive, not just to sinners, but like maybe in this moment we might say people who have problems, people that it's not working out for them, right? Mm-hmm. And wow, what a challenge as a church or a therapist or a safe person. I'll just use that word. Mm-hmm. To be someone who carries holiness in the way of Jesus, that makes moments safe for people, that makes people's stories acceptable and valid and not shamed.
Right.
Yeah. I love that.
That in itself is transformative. I mean, that's why I love Jesus. It's like, he's like, bring it. There's nothing you cannot bring to me. And as followers of Jesus, we're called to do the same. Doesn't mean that you don't have, doesn't mean that there's not change, but it's like who you are. This doesn't define who you are. You're still loved. You're still accepted. That's ultimately the Father's heart.
Maybe one last question here.
Sure.
Can you talk to me about some obstacles that roadblock therapeutic journeys? Or is there anything that just gets in the way? Like maybe somebody goes, you know what? I know I need to change. The pain is dragging me down. I have a repetitive negative pattern in my life. I see it. I'm finally awake to it. It took me a while, but I'm awake to it. I got to do something about it. And maybe I'm going to go to see a therapist. But sometimes things get in the way, or sometimes there's sabotage moments, even in the healing journey. So I would love it if there's obstacles that either keep people from coming to therapy, or even in the midst of a therapeutic moment where people will it just slows the process down.
Things come to mind is that with pain comes grief, or that acknowledgement. And it's hard to grieve, whatever the loss is, and not just physical loss, like to grieve the life that you've once known, even however dysfunctional it is, or it was. So for you to fully enter this new season, like, you know what, I need to change. That means there's a letting go of a lot of things, ways that you thought about yourself, ways that you thought about relationships, ways that you thought about God. Again, however dysfunctional, because none of us are quote unquote crazy. All serve a purpose. Whatever dysfunction we have or whatever patterns we have, they serve a purpose. But when we're alerted that, oh my God, this is not helpful anymore, even though we know it's good for us to let it go, letting go requires some grieving. And that takes time. And no one wants to stay in that place of grieving. And for some people, that grieving is long. It doesn't have to be even a traumatic event. For some people, it may be like, you know what? The way that I used to relate, I can no longer relate. That's functioned. It seemed like it was a good thing, but now that was so familiar. How do I now relate? Because this was a new way, the way I always anger, whether it was this anger was my motive of engaging, or maybe being impulsive was the way I was used to engaging. Now, what do I do now that I know that this is probably not the best way to engage with people or with situations? What's the new way? So being okay in that liminal space, but people don't want to get there because it's hard, it's challenging. So like, well, they just kind of stay in the circles like the wilderness. We'll just keep going around and around. So the grieve, and to honor that space. So you know what? And third times, I wouldn't force a client to go somewhere they're not ready to go, because they know why they're not ready to go, And for some people, it may be that they don't have the support system to really have the space to grieve. If you're taking care of 5 kids and you're working and that there's stuff there, but God knows that, and that it's just realizing it takes time for some people there, and they recognize that if I go here, this is going to require more energy then I am capable of as well. So
That's brilliant.
does that make sense, Adam?
That makes total sense. Makes total sense. I mean, I'm even imagining the way that you're applying grief here. We sometimes think about grief in terms of sadness or the emotional residue, that's attending to loss, maybe like a good loss or whatever, like a person we love or whatever. But you're really right. Grief can be an attachment to even our own dysfunction or just the life. I heard you say the life I had before, the life you had before.
Yeah.
Even if that was a dysfunctional life, that's the only life you know.
Exactly.
And so I can just imagine the sort of grief that would come from going, okay, that's the only life I know, and now I've got maybe this invitation to a new life in front of me, but it's completely unknown.
Exactly.
And so I'm just sad. There's a note of grief and sadness there, and you're just acknowledging. I can also imagine. I'm just thinking of some stuff even in my own life where you realize, it took me 30 years to wake up to this, and I lived in this for 30 years, and there's just a sadness from going like,
right.
Why did I put up with this for 30 years? Why did I do this? Why did I let myself think this, feel this way? Yeah. That's
another
great.
part too is quickly, I know we're running into time. I was thinking as you were talking, Adam, I was thinking of the story of Paul. And, when he had his transformation, his change, that people didn't believe that he really changed.
That's right.
They're like, dude, this guy was killing people. And who was it? I forget who was like, no, it's true. He's really transformed,
Yeah.
And so how, when you're in your process of changing, even questioning, well, will people believe that this is a new, will people believe that this is happening for me? So there's a hesitancy around that too. I wonder.
Well, and I'll just add one more note on your Paul image, because that's really insightful. He starts off Saul, he becomes Paul, and you're right. The early Christians are like, we're not sure we want him to come to church. Like the last time he came to church, he
killed us.
He killed us and threw us in jail. But, part of his story is, most scholars think that Paul hung out with the church there post his conversion for several years before he began to really move in his pastoral preaching and apostolic call. That he was just sort of invisible, And there was that, to use your word again, liminal space of reworking the past life into a new life. Like Jesus did something definitive on that road to Damascus, but then he had several years of working it out before he ever walked into the things that Jesus said he was going to work out. That's a big deal. That, I feel that even as we're talking about it, that seems very important.
Yeah, that is. Oh yeah, I'm thinking about it now. I'm like, I have to read that story.
That'll preach. Dr. Elizabeth, this will preach.
That will preach.
Oh, that's good.
That will preach.
That's good. Well, hey, thanks for showing up with your expertise and your invitation. And thanks for
thank you.
Sharing
thank
with
you
us.
for doing this. It's so great. And yeah, we're all on a journey together. Thank God that the process is ongoing.
Amen.
God's grace.
Amen.
Hi, my name's Keith Sarlos. I am the do everything guy here at Sarlos and Sons, and I am a farmer. And we happen to make wine. We're raising a family, but our byproduct is wine. And we're located in Los Olivos, California, the geographic center of the universe. Fermentation. It's kind of that intersection of art and science, because you don't know what your end result is going to be when you start. You can only start with the best possible fruit, and you can make a lot of bad wine from good fruit. And the only way you can make a really, really great wine is start with great fruit. And we kind of make the joke that fermentation is kind of the voodoo, because when something takes one thing and transforms it into another, and you don't know exactly how that happens. I mean, you do on science, just like a sunrise, man. You watch the sun come up, and I can tell you scientifically why it happens. But there's a beauty to it that is hard to quantify. But you have to be there, and you have to put the work in first to get to the fermentation. It's just like, being in the right place at the right time, watching the sun come up just to take the right photo. A lot of prep goes into it for that one little moment.
Talk to me about why you love wine. You and I were just chit-chatting off air for a moment, and you said you got drug into this. You used the word drug into it.
Yeah.
But I would assume at this point, since you're still doing it, you actually do love wine. Or maybe you don't. I don't want to put words in your mouth. Talk to me about your relationship with wine.
My relationship with wine is complicated, just like everything in my life. I got drug into wine, kind of kicking and screaming. A lot of people have a fantasy about what wine is, and that's the thing that brings them into it, right? You hold a bottle of wine and you drink it and you say, I love this. And you're in the right place with the right people. And just like, when you hear music for the first time, you want to go out and buy a guitar. And then you get into your room and you just make your fingers run across the guitar, and you're just strumming it, and nothing but noise comes out. And wine's a lot like that, because the fantasy of the end product really has nothing to do with the process. And the question was, do I love wine? The answer is yes, because wine has given me everything I have in my life. Gave me a really great relationship with my father. We worked side by side for many years, and he just passed away. It moved me to a place that I never would have lived, which is Los Olivos, California, which is the greatest place in the world. It's given my kids a work ethic, and me and my wife unity in a fight. And the end result, the bottle that has a label on it, is one of the most precious things. And when I look at it, I don't see liquid. I see all the work and all the effort and the late nights and early mornings and sleepless nights and the struggle of what it actually takes to put it into the bottle, because there's a billion points where it can fail. And most people get into wine and they're shocked that the fantasy has nothing to do with the reality, because the reality of wine is there's a lot of easier ways to make a lot more money. But when you give yourself something over to it, like Hemingway said, writing's easy. You just have to sit in front of a typewriter and bleed. And I think that's what we do with wine. Every one of our bottles is there. I put a picture of my family on it, because they're the only thing that really matters to me. If I name it some adjective and some verb, like, kicking spider, or, barking dog, or whatever, everybody names their wine thing. That feels empty. And if I just named it Saarloos, after me or something like that, that seems like vanity. So Sarlos and Sons is really an homage to our family creed, which is we live to honor those that have come before us, and we work to prepare the way for those yet to come. And every bottle we make and every grape we grow is in pursuit of that. So wine has given my kids a great education. It's given me direction. It's given my family a campfire to sit around and work hard and sweat and bleed. And at the very end of the day, we get to share what we did, and hopefully someone loves it. And it's kind of like writing a song, because sometimes you write a song and it was about a part of your life, and then all of a sudden it becomes someone else's song. And that's the song they dance to at their wedding. So that's their song. You happen to write it, but that's their song. And I feel when we put out a bottle and people love it and care for it and open it on an anniversary or Thanksgiving Day table, or, just on a great night with their friends. Yeah, we wrote the song, but that bottle of wine belongs to them, and they're sharing it with people they love. So we were just the stewards. We're the people that took care of it up until just that point where you open it on the right night with the right people, and now it's yours. So I get to be a part of that.
That's beautiful. Really beautiful. I know even from some of the conversation that you've already shared with us here, and then just from some of the experiences I've had, I know that what happens in the winery is one part, but I know that maybe the biggest part of the work, or the most important part of the work, is out in the field. Talk to me about the grapes in the field. Talk to me about your relationship with the plants in the ground, and just, the way you think about it, and the preparation that you and your family make day to day out in the field.
My relationship to the vine is a parent, right? The vine hates you. The vine wants to grow an inch a day when it's pumping, and go in every direction. And our job as farmers is to give order to chaos. And if a vine is not producing, go biblical, we tear it out, we burn it, and we replace it with a vine that will give fruit. And it's not that vine is barren. That vine might just be given 10% less than it should, and that vine needs to be corrected. The vine and the grape growing process is very bizarre, because we are not pouring love on the vines. We are constantly correcting them, constantly giving them order. We're withholding from them constantly to stress them so that they will push off better fruit. And there are so many parallels, that in everyday life with kids or yourself, that, you say, why am I going through this? I didn't deserve this, or whatever. And at that point, you're either stress and become better, or you quit and fail, and you need to be torn out and replaced. That's a tough pill to swallow in this day and age, because the fact is that if you're not producing, you need to be torn out. We're in a world where feelings are more important than facts. You don't get many feelings in a vineyard. It's fact. And the most beautiful part of it is it's as close as a man can come to becoming pregnant, because every year you're going to have a harvest. Every year you're going to have fruit. Every year you have to take care of this living, breathing entity and bring it to a point where you're going to go in and harvest. And the harvest, there's a very beautiful thing that happens, is the vines almost relax, because you get them to the point of stress where you're almost keeping them like a hostage, where you're pushing them as hard as they can to make the fruit better and better and better and better without killing them. And then you go through and you harvest, and you'll see the color just drain from the leaves in a matter of a few days. It's pretty amazing. And you're doing that not because of you want to grow great fruit, but you want to grow great wine. And when I look at a vineyard, I see wine. I see the soul, not the physical grape. I see what it can become, what its opportunity is, not what it is today.
Would you say that great wine comes from vines that struggle?
Oh, without a doubt. Because when you have a wine it's like a bodybuilder, right? You put on the mass first, and you'll see that in a vineyard. You'll see the canes reaching up when the ground starts warming up, and you start having to train those vines to, stay within 2 wires. That kind of once the photo synthesis is, or the leaves are out there, then you go straight into fruit production, and you're withholding, you're clipping, you're dropping any fruit that's not perfect. Then you go through a process that's called veraison. And we've all seen veraison in bananas, where a banana's green and it turns yellow. So all grapes start off green, and then red grapes go through that veraison process, and they go from green to red, and they're telling birds, hey, I'm ripening. Acids drop, sugar levels rise. And then at that point, you're not trying to grow the biggest grape. If you go to the grocery store and buy a bunch of grapes, that little mutant one that's off the right, that when you pop it into your mouth, it burns your glands. That's what we're growing. We're not growing for weight. We're growing for flavor and quality. And we're very judicious and go through, and, if a cluster doesn't look good, and yes, it's a cluster by cluster basis. It isn't like a macro, it's a micro. Every vine will have 13 positions and maybe 1 to 2 clusters per position. And you go through one by one and cut and drop. If the color doesn't go all the way around the cluster, you cut it, you throw it to the ground, and you're decreasing your harvest almost constantly. So when we do that, when it actually gets picked, it gets thrown into a bin, and then we're there throwing it out almost as fast as it's coming in. And if it's not something you want to eat, like visually, it's out. So we are constantly cutting. And when we get to the end results, only the best of the best of the best of the best of the best actually makes it. It's a narrow road. And when that gets into a tank, then we do our best not to screw it up. And we keep it very simple. We're not trying to be showy. We're trying to express our vineyards this year as best we possibly can, so that 3 and 5 years from now, when you taste that wine, you actually are tasting this beautiful time capsule of work, effort, and care that is, encapsulated by glass that used to be sand. The grapes, the wine in there used to be grapes, and the cork in there used to be bark of a tree. And we slap a label of someone that it reminds us of, that we love or honor, and we call it a day.
Yeah, I love that. I think a lot of people listening would be very surprised to know that grape growers are not trying to grow the most grapes. They're trying to grow the best grapes. And in order to do that, you have to reduce the crop. It's counterintuitive.
More is not better, right? I mean, we could all have more. Your only desire as a winemaker should be to create something that you are proud of. And with my kids, it's the same way, right? I wanted to delete the worst parts of me from my children. The traits I hate in myself, I want to eradicate in them. And I want to water the best of my wife, the best of me, and have the next version of us be better. And that's exactly what we try to do with, grape growing. I would say, farming has taught me more about being a parent than anything else in my life, other than my folks, my family. If you just let it lay there, it's not going to be great. If it's not pushed, it's not going to be great. If you don't rise over challenges, it's not going to be great. I mean, no one gets to the Olympics by sitting on the couch. You get to the Olympics by constant, methodical, manic and maniacal pursuit of such a pinpoint of a piece of life. Like anything, once you kind of give your life over to it, find something you love and just let it kill you. Grape farming is one of those things, because I know a lot of farmers, and there's a lot of other things to do. There's a lot of better things to do. But once it gets into your blood, you can't shake it. It's just something you have to do.
Yeah. Keith, talk to me about terroir. Kind of that French idea that wine is an expression of place.
Well, it's not a French idea anymore. About a few years ago, my friend Paul Tarr and I, a couple other people mathematically proved that terroir exists. And we were published. Paul Tarr is a senior fellow at Caltech, and it was a fun little project. So it's not faith versus science anymore. It's all science. And what we did was we took the exact same clone, and a clone is it's genetically identical vine. It's a cutting of a cutting of a cutting. We have it planted on 2 of our different vineyards that are 2 miles apart. And we tested not only the grapes, but the final version of the wine. And there were more similarities to the other grapes grown on the same property than they were to each other, only 2 miles apart. So terroir, not only does it exist, it's scientifically proven. It's pretty neat.
I love that because it means that you can take vines, the same vine, you said clone, genetic replications, and you can plant them around the world, and the place has as much to do with the final product as the vine itself.
Absolutely. I think the place has more to do with the vine, with the grape, than almost the vine. And I'll back that up. So the thought process behind it is, if you grew up or you listen to tons of, one of my favorite podcasts I like is, How I Built This. And there are so many moments of serendipity or providence where someone was in the right place at the right time, and they built the specific set of skills to be a success at a very specific thing. And then everything lined up and they did it. And you go, wow, that was pretty great. I mean, no one becomes a quote unquote success in a vacuum. So going back to terroir, or your vineyard is not your fence line. It's not even where, the vines are planted. If you were in New York City and you buy an apartment and you have, 4 party walls where you have a neighbor to your left, neighbor to your right, up, down, and one behind you, you don't get to tell them what music they play or if they cook fish on Monday nights. You're just part of that living space, right? So when you take a vineyard, your vineyard and where you plant your vines, you don't get to change the way the wind blows, where the sun comes up and where it sets. If you have alluvial soil or clay, if you have a hillside, if you get late sunlight, if you get, a cold sink, a heat sink, you happen to plant your vines with everything around you. The fact that there's a hill to your left and a valley to your right changes the way that the soil will accept water and how hard your vines have to work and all of it. You now are planting the vine in that spot. Hopefully you choose the right clone that will do well because of your temperature, air, and everything around you and the amount of sunlight you get. And you choose the right rootstock to drill into whatever type of soil you have, because you'll use a different bit for metal or wood or glass, just like you would to drill into those things. You have to choose the rootstock to drill into the types of soil you have. You don't want to give it too much vigor, and you don't want to withhold too much. So all of this comes into a confluence that now when you make a wine or grow a grape, that grape is, in the most beautiful form, a bag of water that is influenced by the location and sunshine. And if you can get a grape ripe, that is awesome. It means you planted the right thing in the right spot. But I could plant a lot of great varietals that would be a complete failure on my vineyard. Just like if my son wants to be a fisherman and I keep putting a baseball bat in his hand, right? He'll be a failure at baseball, but he'd be a great fisherman. All of that comes into, you have to be there and watching and waiting and instructing and being a part of the vineyard. Because I think the difference between a good vineyard and a great vineyard is a lot of those choices. But a great vineyard grows best in the farmer's shadow. So being there and touching constantly and influencing, just like if you have a business or doing your job or good husband or good father, a big portion of it is being there and looking for problems and constantly editing yourself, constantly looking for the best in others. That's the hard part of being a vineyard, being a farmer in a vineyard is if you let it, it'll sink you financially, because there has to be a point where you have to say, okay, we're not going to go do this next step. We've done enough. And we have to balance that between growing a grape. One cluster in 100 acres is not sustainable, but you have the perfect cluster, but it's not sustainable. You have to get to that point of equilibrium and beauty where you've done everything you can and you haven't gone past that point of perfection to profitability. You have to balance that out constantly.
Yeah. Since this podcast is called The Ferment, and since really the controlling idea is something would start as grapes or grape juice and then go to wine. And we've been talking here just for a moment about farming grapes. We've been talking about terroir, that the idea of place changes things. I guess I just want to end here. Talk to me as a farmer and a winemaker about that last stage. Like, you've grown the grapes, you've fathered the grapes, you've trained the grapes, you've trellised them, you kept the birds off of them somehow, and then at the end of the year, you bring them into the winery during harvest. Talk to me about that final change where the grapes get crushed and yeast begins to do what it does. Talk to me about grapes going from sweet juice to wine that could last.
That fermentation moment is the moment where you give your farming a chance at immortality. I lost my dad a couple months ago, and I've thought about it very similarly, where my dad was a great guy. When he passed away, we're in the middle of COVID and everything else, and it was pretty sudden. And 1,000 people in 200 cars lined the street and just drove past our little tasting room and waved and honked, and the church bell rang, and it's pretty epic. And what I thought about was, the physical form of a grape is one thing. When you drink wine, you rarely do people think about the grape. They think about, wow, this is wine. This is our end product. And it's that moment of crush where you've taken this fruit in, you've processed, you've removed the stems, you've got it to this kind of beautiful point that it's stable, it's cool, everything is right. And you add yeast, and that yeast transforms that soul. It transforms it from a physical mass into a liquid. And that physical mass was imperfect, and it was blemished, and it was hard. And there was a life that happened for 364 days until the day you picked it. And then it goes to that point where you've got it to a tank or open top fermentation bin or something. You have it in a vessel, and then you add the yeast, and that yeast creates a chain reaction where yeast just eats the sugar and leaves alcohol, right? But what it really does is it changes the flavor and the taste of the liquid. It's no longer this sugar acidic liquid. It goes through this metamorphosis, and then you clean it and rack it, and you get all the lees and all the mog, which is material other than grapes. You get it all out and clean until it's what you kind of see in that final product of a bottle. And in that process, you put it to barrel, and then you just let it wait, and then it slowly goes through this little oxygenation of aging, and the tannins that start chaining up and it goes from being, something that feels like it's drug across your tongue to, I always talk about like bed sheets, first you're in burlap, and time after, more and more and more time happens. And then the thread count goes up, and the thread count goes up, and the thread count goes up. And pretty soon it's silky. And then wine isn't like milk where it spoils and there's a peak and then it falls off. It just gets to this point of it's not going to get any silkier. It's like your phone. You can't see the DPI anymore, right? It becomes finer than perceived. And then it's, how did you store it? How did you take care of it? But that moment of putting a bottle, putting wine in a bottle, putting a label on it, putting a cork in it, and thinking back all the way to the day we picked it, there's amazing transformation. But, winemaking is the only way we give our farming a shot at immortality. And having now lost my dad, this is all such a blink of an eye. It really is. We think of things in terms of years and decades and months, and it feels like we've been in COVID forever and blah, blah, blah. But really, we're not. This is so fleeting, and it's what happened during that life of that grape or that life of that person that really leads to the next level. There's a beautiful cosmic ballet that happens that we happen to be a part of, and we happen to get to sit there and look at it. We get to pick it, and we get to make wine from it, and we get to share it with people. But going back to like what we originally talked about, that's the fantasy, right? The fantasy is holding a bottle with your name on it and not having to go through any of the pain and struggle. Most people pay other people to do that. And when you are holding that bottle and you've gone through the pain and the struggle and everything else, there is a pride that comes into that, to what you're pouring and you're tasting. But the fantasy really should be the work. The fantasy should be the day-to-day fight and the day-to-day struggle in pursuit of something that eventually will be great. You rarely get to hold something in your hands like that. And I get to. And as hard as that is to get it to that point, it does feel pretty good sometimes. It feels great when it becomes someone else's song.
Right.
If that song's about heartbreak and pain and you wrote that song at, the worst point in your life, but it becomes this beautiful hallelujah for a husband and wife, that's the song they dance to at their wedding. It belongs to them more than it belongs to the person who wrote it. And we get to be a part of that every now and then.
Keith, what was your dad's name?
Larry Saarloos.
Larry. What was Larry's favorite vintage?
The next one.
The next one.
I mean, it's a funny thing to say. It's like we got into farming. We're world-class failures. That's a good way to put it. When we bought that piece of property, Dad wanted to grow something from the ground and raise cattle, and they were an apple orchard, and we went through a whole year of farming it and then watched all cattle eat it because they weren't great. They were good. They weren't great. And we were going to go deliver it to the person who bought it all. And they're just like, nope, sorry. And if they would have taken it, you wouldn't be talking to me because my dad would be an apple farmer and I didn't want to do that. So that's where we would have stopped. But every major opportunity in our lives has come at the jaws of failure. So we tore the apple orchard out. We planted it in grapes. We farmed it ourselves. We didn't know not everybody did that. So we got good at that. And, every portion of, when we had a freeze go through, we lost 20% of our vineyard in one night. And by the end of that week, we were grafting it to new varietals. Then a new vineyard that nobody wanted came up for sale, and the owners begged us to buy it. And we tore it all out and we replanted it. We planted varietals we thought we would do well there. And then we had that great problem of having to sell grapes that are untested, which shoved me into opening this tasting room. And it's, constantly major fails turn into opportunities. And right now I'm sitting on the edge of a major fail. So hopefully it's a next step's an opportunity.
That's right. I think that's just farming, Keith.
Yeah. You know what? It's one heck of a life, you know?
It is. My brother-in-law and I, when we're out on the farm, like we don't call it farming until something breaks.
That's when you start farming.
That's when you start farming. Like
That's
we'll
right.
be out. This was back a few months ago, but I was out with one of my boys, my oldest, and we were on the tractor, and of course one of the hydraulic hoses busted, and there's
Oh yeah.
fluids going everywhere, and he's like, he sort of laments that. And I just looked at him. I said, "Now we're farming."
Oh
You
yeah.
know, we had these plans for today. No, the first thing we're gonna do is figure out this hose.
Yeah, you know, my days are always, I wake up, take a shower, you know, try to do all my emails, and then I head out, get a cup of coffee. And I honestly never know after I get a cup of coffee what today is.
Yeah,
Never
well, it
know.
could be anything.
You know,
Could be anything. Man, Keith, thanks for doing this.
hey, thanks for having me, man.
Oh, so
Appreciate
good.
it.
So good.
Hi everyone, this is Melissa Keller, Events Director for Vineyard Worship. If you've been enjoying the podcast, I've got a couple of ways you could really help us. First of all, review the podcast on iTunes or the podcast platform of your choice. This helps more people find us. Also, connect with us on social media, Instagram at the Ferment Podcast and Twitter at FermentCast. Thanks for listening. See you next time.